So the question for tonight is, how do we really know that, like, if God made the whole world, and then how do we know that we're the center of it? And how do we know that plants aren't just giving us oxygen and waiting for us to eventually expire so that they can consume us, and that plants aren't actually just farming us? So I'm kidding. The question for tonight is, most dogs understand several human words, and I don't understand any dog barks. So does that mean that they are smarter than us? Yeah. Let's dig into this, you guys. Yeah, good stuff here. So we're talking about the deepest question. This was Michael's question, but I love this question. Is if God wants us to believe in him, why can't God have made a clearer world, or have made it clear that he wants us to believe in him, or how to believe in him? And like, most of us are kind of like postmodern influenced millennials. I mean, there's some Gen Zs in the church and stuff, but for the most part, we like questions more than answers as a people group. And so I think we've been emphasizing that we're not answering any of these questions, we're just kind of playing with them. But this one is like the final boss in the game of questions. Is like, why would God make why would God plop us down into a world without clear instructions? The world didn't have to be this way. Why is it so confusing and complicated? And I love this question, and I feel like I want to just sit in the backyard and think about it for a week, or just like straight. Like, I don't want to be done with it after tonight. And I was thinking about how this question touches on our development process. And I was like, little baby Henning is in there right now, developing teeth and hair, and is translucent. And if there's any awareness going on for baby Henning right now, it is very minimal, right? But as we develop, there's this, it's like thoughts, this move in like slow moving clouds into our brains, and develop in complexity over time. And then as little baby Henning comes out of the world, I've seen this happen twice. And the first reaction of a baby entering the world isn't like, oh, like, this is new, like, interesting. It's screaming, it's terror, it's fear. It's like, this is overwhelming, this is too much. What's this new feel of air on my skin? And like, why is it cold out here? Why are the sounds all so sharp? And like, why does my head hurt? Like, this is like, so they scream until they pass out. Yes, they do. I saw it. You had the bomb cocktail going on. They are screaming. Yeah, the first emotion is like, this world is too much. We're born into an overwhelming and a confusing world, and it stays that way. And the first question, like, once we can develop words, like one of the dominant first words we use over and over is why, Papa, why, Papa, why, Papa. We're always asking these questions. And as new clouds of thought move in, and there's greater complexity that we think, we develop ideas of morality, social identity, political identity. And these questions don't stop. Even in my late 30s, I'm asking all these questions about, how did my family screw me up? And how has that made me who I am? It's this progress of increasing awareness of, who am I? What is the world about? And yet with the awareness that as we learn more, the more we realize that we don't know, that the simple mental maps of the world that we make in our early middle school, high school times, we tear those apart in our 20s. We try to reconfigure them in our 30s. Like, it's that Socratic paradox of, I know that I know nothing. Are you guys familiar with when Socrates said, I know that I know nothing? Basically, he just says, like, I know more than other people, but the only thing that I know is that nobody else knows anything either. And that, like, wisdom is realizing the limits of our thinking. And I was a philosophy major. And for me, questions were like a forest that the deeper you walk into them, the more questions you get. Every new question you ask leads to 5 others. And I just like, I could go on. I could start talking about like people get really confused about how do physical objects become consciousness? Like how do you bridge that gap? And all the answers there like lead to 5 more problems. You guys might find me later this week just like wandering around Pioneer Square with a mirror saying, "Who am I?" But very specific. I'm getting revved up on this question, but I love this question. Like, why wouldn't God make things clear? Because I think it's so fundamental to just the way life is structured that we start with knowing nothing, and the progress leads to greater questions, and our experience is of more questions than answers. And so, like, why? Like, why would God do that? And we're going to read this passage. You want to read it out loud, Deanna? And then.
First Corinthians 13, verse 8. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these 3 remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
Take a few minutes to just think about what light does this shed on Michael's question of why hasn't God made a clearer world? So, what light does this shed on Michael's question? Let's start there.
I don't know if I would term it like revealing as to like the heart of the matter, but there's something fundamental about being human that is to be learning and to experience new things and to be flexible and teachable.
Yeah.
We're really resistant to it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's something intrinsic about that.
Yeah. Any other thought?
Interesting. This is not answering your question, but It's interesting that the bulk of it is like, yeah, things like we know in part, things are gonna pass away, like what we know will change. But it's bookended with love. So there's some connection that Paul wants us to understand about lack of knowledge and the importance of love, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I like that. It's like knowing is not the important thing, loving is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, we know some things, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is that you love people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I guess I have two different thoughts. The first thought is, I guess I hadn't thought about it until just now, looking at the three things that he starts with: prophecies, tongues, and knowledge. All of those, I mean, prophecies and tongues seems like, okay, random gift of the Spirit, let's roll it on out. But I don't think that's how it is, actually, because tongues are about revealing hidden knowledge, and so is prophecy on some level. Like they're both about finding out or discerning things that are previously not discerned. And that's what the quest for knowledge is as well, fundamentally. I imagine that's kind of what he's getting to. But there will be a time where those things are fulfilled. And even like the question, why didn't God make it clear how to live in this world? I mean, they're just like, there are a bunch of levels. There's an assumption that it's not clear. And yeah, I don't know how to create peace in the Middle East in our time, nor does anyone else. But I do like little kids have some inherent sense of what loving is. It doesn't take very long.
Yeah.
And I have a sense of what loving is, even though it's not always completely clear. Like it's a direction, not an answer. Like we don't get a recipe list of do these three things. Like modernists love recipes and they love boxes and compartments, but postmodernists don't. We just like to throw a bunch of flour into something and hope cookies come out. And that is kind of how love works in a way, because love takes you into the forest, but it tells you to keep on going in this direction. And you might not know your destination, but you know the cardinal.
Yeah.
And so that's, so I don't know how, I mean, it is hard to know how to live in this world, but in another way, it's really not.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, which is like, what are the steps to salvation isn't like clearly spelled out, but knowing how to love is definitely something that we all have access to in all of our. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to jump in and say, I think that's similar to what I was going to, the way I've been thinking about it is, this is Seth, by the way, I guess. That the roadmap to understanding and being in the world is through love, and so God's presence is understood and felt through love. I mean, I think like if you could boil down the gospel into just a few words, that Jesus exemplifies that in human form, and then the apostles go on to write about that and demonstrate that over and over and over again to the point of death. That love is the way that we understand God, and it is our roadmap back to God. And we all have that inherent. That's just universal. We all have that, and I think we all have an instinct to that togetherness and oneness. That the atonement, the at-one-ment.
More thoughts?
I think there's something interesting here too about, and this probably picks up a little bit on what you were alluding to, Amy, but like,
I think we so as human creatures, and especially humans in the West and then humans in America, like take each one of those things, but that there is this like sense that we can know, period, like that we can know whatever the thing is, that we can know. There's this assumption that we can know it, we can find it out, we can figure it out, we can go to school, we can, and there in this I hear so much of this, like really, to me it's beautiful, but this reminder of the humility that like no matter what you know, you only know in part.
Yeah.
And even though I don't know what original, I don't know this particular like original language stuff, but I was thinking this time that we see, and it depends on whether it's see in a mirror dimly or whether we just see dimly, but like even a mirror, if it is in
It's
any way
both in a mirror
specific
dimly.
to mirror, like a mirror is actually opposite.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there is literally, okay, what you're seeing is just like, it is really just, it is so in part. And so
Yeah.
I think what I hear too is an invitation and a reminder of humility.
Yeah.
That you just, and with that, this really remarkable promise that like there actually will be a time when it can be fully known, which I think is also really interesting, because it could be, you know, I think we're also culturally fond of saying, like, with loving the questions in the postmodern, you know, millennial whatever zeitgeist of just saying like, oh, we can also just embrace mystery and we can just never know and it's great. And it's like, okay, but also I hear in this Paul also saying like, there actually will be a time when you are fully known. There will be a time when we shall see face to face, when you know, when there will when completeness comes. So I think those two things are really meaningful.
Yeah.
Well, I think my, just a brief addendum, my personal experience with the postmodern and zeitgeist has been like, millennials are loving asking questions all the time, but they are never satisfied with any answer. And that is kind of on the other end of the coin of mysticism, which is like loving the mystery and having peace in it. But millennials we don't have peace in the questions. We're like, someone gives us an answer and we're like, oh, that's not good enough. Like, we just need to ask more questions. There's no like Zen, like, let's love the mystery.
Or faithful response of like, I will not know, but I will now, but I believe it will be revealed.
Right.
Yeah. Let's talk about why. Like, why might God have us looking through a mirror dimly now? Why might God have us in a life of more question than answers? And let's not ask that question from the angle of like, oh, this means God must not be real, that the world is so confusing, but rather like, given that this is the way that the world is, what could it tell us about the intentions of God or about the meaning of our experience that God has structured the world this way?
We get to choose relationship then.
Yeah.
It's not just like, you're in heaven already.
Yeah.
When you exist and you're here and there's no choice, it's like you get to opt into love and like experience it fully because you are choosing that.
Yeah. I'm reading this like young adult novel. I think I've talked to a handful of people about this book. It's called like Scythe. What is it?
We talked
Sickle,
about
the sickle
that.
thing.
Yeah.
Basically, like there's no like humans have advanced to the degree that like the computer has figured out how to like humans don't die anymore. And it's really interesting because a lot of the book is talking about how like people are just kind of listless and like lose the passion for life, and that was like, that idea was kind of fascinating to me, that, and I believe that there's something kind of beneficial to the process of like being uncertain and asking questions or going through hard things and trying to cling to hope or having faith, like that the hard stuff actually does make life really meaningful.
Mm.
So there's something, yeah, so that maybe there is something really good in this for us, like
Yeah.
the building of faith. Like, even though I have so many doubts, sometimes like I'm gonna choose to have faith in you, and that life leads to greater richness.
Mm.
And not to lean into the Western, like, we can logic everything out, because we can't. But I think like it does make sense. If you're not God, you will only know in part, no matter what. So like the only way that God could have made this any different is if he made us also God. So it's like, even if we
Mhm.
had like 99% of God's knowledge, we would still have infinitely less knowledge than him. And it would still be incomplete.
Mm.
I love that you opened with the concept of birth. And because I heard once, like, a baby in utero like has no concept of movie night and pizza. Even when
Important-
they're born, like,
important concepts aren't there yet.
it's kind of meaningful, you know, it's something we enjoy and it's something for them to look forward to. But
Oh,
there's
yeah,
no-
to learn
there's
about,
no
yeah.
concept of that yet, and no capacity to enjoy it yet,
Mm-hmm.
because it would at that moment be harmful even at birth. I had this verse in particular. I had a rather profound,
Yeah.
like, out of mind experience with God. And what I experienced was that I was not, like, psychologically safe in different spiritual realms. It was very overwhelming, and he was with me, and it was okay. But I think that if we I don't think we can handle it. I think it
Mm.
would so overwhelm our systems that we would shut down. And this
Yeah.
verse, like, in order, like, so in the same way
Mm.
that your baby's growing and developing lungs and whatever, we're needing to grow here
Yeah.
in faith and hope
Yeah.
and love.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
There's something about our survival, or our ability to thrive in whatever comes next, that these ingredients, that's what we need to be developing. Like,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, like this life is a womb for the next one.
Yeah. Seth's got his
But there
hand
is
up.
more.
Yeah. I'm curious, like I realized that when I was talking that I missed a couple of things. One was that I think like the assumption is that love is like love and contains mystery, and that the mystical things that a couple of other folks have talked about, that's sort of
Yeah.
couched in, I think, the pursuit of love and the pursuit of God. But also the other thing I wanted to ask, and I don't see Michael there. I'm curious if we're getting to the heart of the question. And I was just curious if, like, you talked to him about that at all.
He's not here.
Because it's just like, it's a tough question, right? Because I think it's really easy to say, well, life's a journey. It's about following your instincts through love, and that will lead you to God. I think that's going to be our basic default answer to folks who are spiritual. And so I'm just curious if we're getting to the heart of the question.
Right. I'll have this conversation again with him later to make sure we are, but that's a good point. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
Yeah, what Amy was talking about kind of reminded me of Genesis. You know, and so God created man in his own image, in the image of God who created him, male and female who created him. The word image there is the same word in Hebrew that's used for idols. So we're created as idols of God, as representations of him in this sort of fundamental sense. And the reason that we were put into that garden was to learn how to till and take dominion over the earth, which is what God does. And the reason that we got kicked out of the garden was because we ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And there's an assumption that I think most people make without even really thinking about it, that we were never supposed to gain the knowledge of good and evil. But I don't think that there's really any reason to believe that given the story, given that he was teaching us and, you know, he gave Adam a job and he gave Adam and Eve one another. And so in a fundamental sense, I think that the brokenness that occurred when we decided we wanted to define good and evil for ourselves and say what is right and wrong on our own created a situation where we can't know. And I think the preparation of this life as preparation for the next life is in a way where we're taking up the part of the process that we left off when we hiked out of the garden. And so I think this isn't necessarily answering the question, but it was just something I was thinking about, because in a fundamental way, it's the human condition to not know. And in a fundamental way, it's to have a broken sense of love, to kind of know, but to not totally know.
Yeah.
And that's because we weren't willing, and all of us in some ways every day are kind of unable to just to say, I don't understand, but I'm waiting and I'm willing to grow in this knowledge. So
Yeah.
anyways, Genesis.
Yeah. I was having a thought, like most people nowadays would go like, given how incomplete our comprehension of the world is, it's stupid to believe in any take on reality because it's so incomplete. Like look at any other culture, like why would you believe in one? Paul is doing the exact opposite here and saying, look at how incomplete our comprehension is. So lean deeper into faith. Why? And what does that teach us? I got some ideas. It's a hard book. Yeah, that's more of a setup for something I wanted to talk about, so I'll just talk about it.
Well,
Well, go ahead.
Isn't there a Bible verse, maybe in Paul's writings, where he says, "We are not of those who shrink back," or is that like some other quote? I don't know, but it's like the idea that, like you said, lean into faith. Like we shouldn't look at our lack of knowledge and be like, "Oh, I guess we'll like give up on knowing things."
Yeah.
Like it's lean into that. Like
Yeah. I feel like when you're in a place of insecurity about an outcome, it becomes even more important to lean into the hope that a better outcome could happen. And right, like, and one way I was thinking about it is like when little baby Henning comes out, little baby Henning knows nothing. Little baby Henning's got all these sharp sounds coming at it, and just this cruel cold air. And I could go, well, clearly this means that this new place is bad. There are only cruel intentions in this world. Otherwise, why would my head be hurting so badly? And so I cannot trust anyone, and I need to take care of myself, and I need to get away from all these people because clearly their intentions are bad. And little baby Henning crawls away, right? That's not what we talking about. That's not the. That's a fast develop. Yeah, it's a very strong baby. That's not what babies do. Babies are terrified. They're shocked for the first 15 minutes, but then they fall asleep. And then when they wake up, they're rooting for a nipple. They have this innate knowledge of the motherness of this blurry new world, like that there's some care for them that's out there, and they're reaching for it and they're looking for it. They have this innate ability to have faith in the midst of not knowing anything about their new environment. And the Bible talks about being born again, that when we confront the intellectual terror of the exponential questions in all directions of all human fields of knowledge, that if you look into them, you can get more confused, or at least if you look into philosophy, you can. When we hit that terror of not knowing, we need to become like a baby and to have faith instead of that. And faith is this way of saying, instead of believing in my powers of comprehension, I'm gonna believe in the goodness of that greater being that's taking care of me. That's grace, that's faith, and that's what babies do. They believe in the goodness of that greater being that's there for them, and they root for the nipple.
Yes.
Um,
I just
go
want
ahead.
to run real quick. I love this. I don't think that we talk about the motherness of God nearly enough. And it's personal to me for a lot of reasons. But
yeah,
the word El Shaddai in Hebrew is translated often like the Almighty, but I think it literally means the great breast. I'm pretty sure.
Mhm.
You can look that up, but it's a name for God, and that's what they call God. And it's like that principle of when we become overwhelmed, have faith in like the principle that in the universe there is hope, there is a source of care and growth.
Yeah.
It's the motherly principle of God.
yeah. So what I want to say is, like, people in Seattle think faith is unscientific wish fulfillment, but I'm like, no, you are the baby that's afraid of its parents and is running away from it. And it's going to screw you up. It's going to make you spiritually malnourished. Our culture thinks that there's no meaning in the world except for what you can make up for yourself. Our culture thinks that there's no God looking out for us, and it makes people afraid. It makes people invested in trivialities, and it makes people feel like they need to control their own reality by investing in their retirements and keeping themselves safe, and not spiritually nourishing themselves because they don't believe that that's even out there, but instead diverting themselves into video games, into just, yeah, it leads to spiritual malnourishment, right? Faith is not irrational, but it's just that reason has its limits. And when you hit the limits of our reason, faith is the best response. That's why he says, like, look at how incomplete our knowledge is. Have more faith, because when you hit the limits of what it's possible to know, faith is the only response that has some hope in it. Faith is both humble and it's trusting. Faith says, I've given up thinking that I'm going to know everything. And yet I can have trust and I can have peace because I trust in the goodness of that greater being that's here for me. So yeah, Paul sees the dim reflection, the incomplete comprehension, and he says, lean further into faith. But then, like we were talking about this, it's faith, it's hope, but most it's love. And I think we kind of already hit why love is the most important thing to lean into. So we won't hit it again, but here, I am now going to read you a 7-minute quote. I know that as I'm reading this, some of you guys are gonna be like, Caleb, you know that this was a bad idea. Why are you doing this to us? That's what her grandma just communicated. I know it's a bad idea to read you guys a 7-minute quote. However, after this, some of you are gonna go back and watch YouTube videos that are 3 times as long. You're gonna watch like whatever show you watch, and it will not be as spiritually enriching as this quote. I guarantee you. So you will be bored, but it will be good for you.
Can you also send it out in the thing for those of me or
Those of me.
who are visual, like I will not retain 3/4 of it just because it's auditory,
Okay.
but I would love to read it.
Yeah. Should I do that after or no?
Oh, you could tell.
What?
Can we play this on YouTube at double
speed, so it's
No,
I don't know that.
you're gonna listen. You're gonna listen to me
Yeah,
reading
increase
it.
the speed is not
And-
increased over.
Oh my God, Caleb. This Frederick Buechner though, so don't worry, Deanna. I'm gonna put it on the website. Do you want me to put it on the website now so you can read along?
Isn't that easy?
It's gonna take me.
Don't worry.
So 7 minutes is not turning into 9.
No, it's
I
not.
guess.
No, I wasn't talking about now. I was
Oh,
I meant
okay.
like
Oh, wait, not now.
no, no,
Okay.
no, afterward.
Okay, I'll do it after.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it takes me about 2 minutes to put it on the website. I can do it. Okay. Where is this thing? So this is okay, so this is Message in the Stars by Frederick Buechner, and believe it or not, I took out like over half of it. Or no, less than half of it. Okay. If God really exists, why in heaven's name does God not prove that he exists instead of leaving us here in our terrible uncertainty? At one time or another, everyone asks such, oh, if you want to like sit down, like cross-legged, like story time, feel free. Story time, gather around, children. If God really exists, why in heaven's name does God not prove that he exists instead of leaving us here in our terrible uncertainty? At one time or another, everyone asks such a question. In some objectifiably verifiable and convincing way, we want God himself to demonstrate his own existence. Deep in our hearts, I suspect that this is what all of us want, unbelievers no less than believers. And I've wondered sometimes what would happen if God were to do just that. What would happen if God did set about demonstrating his existence in some dramatic and irrefutable way? Suppose, for instance, that God were to take the great dim river of the Milky Way, as we see it down from here, flowing across the night sky, and were to brighten it up a little, and then rearrange it all, so that all of a sudden, one night, the world would step outside and look up at the heavens and see not the usual haphazard scattering of stars, but written out in letters light years tall, the sentence, "I really exist," or "God is." If I were going to try to write a story or a play about such an event, I would start, of course, with the first night that this great theological headline appeared there in the stars, with suns and moons to dot the I's and the tails of comets to cross the T's. And I would try to show some of the ways I can imagine people might respond to it. I would show some of them sinking to their knees, not because they're especially religious people, but just because it might seem somehow the only natural thing to do under the circumstances. They would perhaps do it without even thinking about it, just crumpling down to their knees there in the tall grass out behind the garage. Some of them I would show running back into their houses in terror, guilty ones in terror of judgment, sophisticated ones in terror at the stark and terrible simplicity of it. Just God is written up there in the fire of the stars. And maybe in everyone, some degree of terror at just the sheer and awesome vastness of the unknown suddenly making itself known. There'd be a good many tears of regret, I suspect, people thinking that if only they had known it before, what different lives they might have had. And in many a person, the sudden wild upsurge of hope. The sick old man lying in bed where he cannot sleep and looking up through his bedroom window. On the table, his clock tick-tocks his time away, but there in the sky, he sees proof at last of a reality beyond time. And I would want to touch at least one of the peculiar astonishments. I would want to touch at least on the peculiar astonishment of preachers and theologians who spend so much of their lives talking about God that unless they're very careful, God starts to lose all reality for them and to become just a subject for metaphysical speculation. For them too, there would be this great affirmation in the night, and they would discover that they'd been all right after all, more right than perhaps they'd ever quite been able to believe, and they would marvel at the strangeness of it. What I would be trying to suggest in my story would be that the initial impact of God's supplying the world with this kind of objective proof of his existence would be extraordinary. Churches would have to overflow into football stadiums and open fields. Wars would stop. Crime would stop. A kind of uncanny hush would fall over the whole world. But as my story ended, I'm afraid that in honesty, I would have to suggest something else. Several years would go by, and God's proof of himself would still be blazing away every night for all to read. In order to convince people that the message was not just some 1,000,000 to 1 freak of nature, I'd be tempted to have God keep on rewriting it in different languages, sometimes accompanying it with bursts of pure color or with music so celestial that finally the last hardened skeptic would be convinced that God must indeed exist after all. Then the way I would have it end might be this. I'd have a child look up at the sky some night, just a plain garden variety child with perhaps a wad of bubblegum in his cheek. If this were to be a movie, I'd have a close-up here of just the child's eyes with the stars reflected in them, and I would have him spell out the message syllable by syllable. And deep in the heavens, there would be the usual strains of sublime music. And then I would have the child turn to his father, or maybe with the crazy courage of childhood, I would have him turn to God himself, and the words that I would have him speak would be words to make the angels gasp. So what if God exists? He'd say. What difference does that make? And in the twinkling of an eye, the message would fade away for good, and the celestial music would be heard no more. Or maybe they would continue for centuries to come, but it would no longer make any difference. We all want to be certain, we all want proof, but the kind of proof we tend to want, scientifically or philosophically demonstrable proof that would silence all doubts once and for all, would not in the long run, I think, answer the fearful depths of our need at all. For what we need to know, of course, is not just that God exists, not just that beyond the steely brightness of the stars, there's a cosmic intelligence of some kind that keeps the whole show going, but that there is a God right here in the thick of our day-by-day lives who may not be writing messages about himself in the stars, but who in one way or another is trying to get messages through our blindness as we move around down here, knee deep in the fragrant muck and misery and marvel of the world. It is not objective proof of God's existence that we want, but whether we use a religious language for it or not, the experience of God's presence. That is the miracle that we're really after. And that is also, I think, the miracle that we really get. I believe that we know much more about God than we admit that we know. Then perhaps we altogether know that we know. God speaks to us, I would say, much more often than we realize or than we choose to realize. Who knows what he will say to me today or to you today, or into the midst of what kind of unlikely moments he will choose to say it. Not knowing is what makes today a holy mystery, as every day is a holy mystery. But I believe that there are some things that by and large, God is always saying to each of us. All of us, for instance, carry around inside ourselves, I believe, a certain emptiness, a sense that something is missing, a restlessness, the deep feeling that somehow all is not right inside our own skin. Part of the inner world of everyone is this sense of emptiness, unease, incompleteness. And I believe that this is in itself a word from God, that this is the sound that God's voice makes in a world that has explained him away. In such a world, I suspect that maybe God speaks to us most clearly through his silence, his absence, so that we know him best through our missing him. But he also speaks to us about ourselves, about what he wants us to do and what he wants us to become. And this is the area where I believe we know so much more about him than we admit even to ourselves, where people hear God speak, even if they do not believe in him. A face comes towards us down the street. Do we raise our eyes or do we keep them lowered, passing by in silence? When a friend has hurt us, do we take pleasure in hating him? Because hate has its pleasures as well as love. Or do we try to build back some flimsy little bridge? Sometimes when we're alone, thoughts come swarming into our heads like bees, some of them destructive, ugly, self-defeating thoughts, some of them creative and glad. Which thoughts do we choose to think then, as much as we have the choice? Will we be brave today or a coward today? Will we be a friend or cold as ice today? All the absurd little meetings and decisions and inner skirmishes that go on to make up our days, it all adds up to very little, and yet it all adds up to very much. Our days are full of nonsense, and yet not because it is precisely into the nonsense of our days that God speaks to us words of great significance. Not words that are written in the stars, but words that are written into the raw stuff and nonsense of our days, which are not nonsense, just because God speaks into the midst of them. And the words that he says to each of us differently are: be brave, be merciful, feed my lambs, press on toward the goal. These words that God speaks to us in our own lives are the real miracles. They're not miracles that create faith, as we might think that a message written in the stars would create faith, but they are miracles that it takes faith to see. Faith in the sense of openness, faith in the sense of willingness to wait, to watch, to listen for the incredible presence of God here in the world among us. I love the idea that we don't need God to clear up our need for faith by giving us clarity, more clarity. Like, what we need is to learn how to live by greater faith, to trust in the goodness of that being that we can't see, but who's speaking to us in this hidden way, but that's calling us forward into deeper forms of love, right? And when we say, like, God, why can't you make it clear? It's our assumption that if he did it, that it would solve something. That we just need a miracle, that we just need it to be more spelled out so that we can believe more deeply. But the Bible never said that the problem with humanity was in our minds. It says that the problem is in our hearts. It says that the problem is sin. And God's goal isn't to change us so that we believe that he exists. His goal is to take a selfish heart and to turn it into a selfless one. And maybe writing a message in the stars doesn't really do anything for that, right? If all God wants to see happen to us is belief, or like, if life is just this quiz where the right answer is to raise your hand at an altar call, then yeah, like, make it clear, because that's not clear enough. But James says that belief by itself is worthless, that demons believe, like that's worthless. But if what God wants to do is to build our character, that takes time, and that might take unclarity. to have a process where we can grow character, to have our life be about discipleship. And I love that the passage talks about, like, when I was a child, I thought as a child, but as I became an adult, I put childish things away. And it's that description of the growing process that we were talking about, the teeth and hair stage, the baby hitting's in, the
Hopefully we'll continue.
yeah. The way that my daughters now are in this, they're pretending, their play is preparing them for greater responsibility later in their life, and how in middle school you're creating forms of understanding the world that you then deconstruct later in your 20s, and how in your 30s you start to work through your baggage as a person, hopefully, or at least that's what I'm doing. And I don't know what happens in your 40s yet. I'm not there yet, but I can definitely see you, like, even in the last couple of weeks, I'm learning a bunch of stuff about myself. Like, I was talking to my brother about, like, just seeing some things that my mom did and realizing how that's made me the way that I am. And I've been opening up new parts of my heart to God that are hard, and it's been really painful, and I've been feeling really stressed out, having anxiety attacks, but also knowing that those anxiety attacks are these invitations to deeper faith, to deeper trust, to deeper love, to learn how to be a baby again and not have control over my reality. And I've just, while that's been happening, my prayer life has been so good. Like, I've been crying in prayer probably like 3 times a week. And especially like when my mentor or somebody else says, like, God's really proud of you, feeling that, like, really deeply, that God's really proud that I'm still trying to be a baby and still trying to rely on him and still growing and still learning, that God's really proud of me. And I'm starting to set, like the passage says, you will know even as you are known. Starting to know myself the way that God knows me, instead of all the messed up layers that I, saw of who I was before, taking those off and seeing the way that God knows me. I think we need this wild and confusing world as a dancing partner for this kind of growth. I think we need it, because you can't have a symphony with one note. You can't have a story that's just one word long. And we have to believe that God is writing a story with our life. He's writing a story with the stuff that we're going through. So can we see the wisdom in the confusion? Can we believe that into the confusion, that there's this invitation to character? That God is using our uncertainty to develop deeper faith, and that he's using the process to grow a more stable and a more proven love. Faith, hope, and love abide in these. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to look really quickly at just, I want to do a physical representation for us of what the passage says. And it preaches. We don't have to say anything about it. We're just going to look at it and we're going to think about it. You can start playing some music. Come here, Dan. Stand up. So I'll turn it so you guys see what's going on here. I've got a dirty mirror.
I was wondering, will they got dirt all over?
So yeah, let's just sit with this image and talk to God about it. So it says, this is how I'm looking at you right now. This is how I'm looking at the world. There's so much of myself in it. It's hard to see. It's dirty, right? I think God says this is how we're gonna look at each other. Right here. Face to face. Yeah, we're gonna look at God face to face. Let's pray. Yeah, God, help us to be babies and to have more faith and have more trust in you.
Oh God. From what we've heard and seen and even felt tonight, God, I'm reminded and convicted that actually such a huge part of our heart's desire is just simply to know you, to see you, and to be fully seen. That we actually just really, really crave seeing clearly. And the truth is, God, that while there is absolutely beauty in living the questions, that there are also days where we just really, really need something to hold on to. And we really need somebody to see something other than a dim mirror of us. And that's you. That's just you. And so we call out to you in this season, especially in this season of Advent, where we're anticipating not just you coming at Christmas, like you came once, and we remember that, we memorialize that, we celebrate that, but we long for your coming again when all of this garbage is set right. Where all of the partial seeing is becomes just blazing color. Forget 3 dimensions, it's in 8 dimensions. Forget partial peace that we can even start to wrap our heads around, but peace that is so holistic. We can't even begin. We can't even begin to capture the beauty that will be when you come again. And so we call out for you tonight, God. We call out for you to come in. To come in and to come and set all things right. That our eyes would see clearly. And actually, even God, we call out that you prepare our hearts and the eyes of our hearts to see clearly. Would you come? Come, oh, come, Emmanuel. Oh, come, and ransom captive that mourns on the earth until the Son of God rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O come, thou dayspring, come and cheer our spirits like thy disperse the gloomy clouds around, and desert shadows burn to light. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O come, strong branch of Jesse, thine own from death's around thy people, and give them victory o'er the day. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Come, desire of nations, in one loaf and one heart. Did enemies strive and quarrels cease, and fill the world with heaven and peace. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Shall come to thee, O Israel. Sing. Come, Lord Jesus. Come, Lord Jesus. Come, Lord Jesus. Come, Lord Jesus. And so communion is out. We have this opportunity to receive and to remember, to honor Jesus, to honor the sacrifice that he made, to honor what perfected and perfect love looks like. And so Jesus, with these elements, with this simple bread and this simple wine, Lord, we honor you, we honor your life. We honor your incarnation, your coming into human flesh. Jesus, we honor your life, your teaching, your miracles, your faithfulness. Jesus, we honor your sacrifice, your death, your obedience, even unto death. That you led the way all the way there. And Jesus, we look toward and we honor your resurrection. And so be honored, be praised, be glorified as we receive your body, as we receive your blood, as we receive the gift you have given to us. I believe there is gluten-free bread as well for those who need that. I will exalt you. I will exalt you. I will exalt you. You are my God. I will exalt you. I will exalt you. I will exalt you. You are my God. My hiding place, my safe refuge, my treasure, Lord, you are my friend and king, anointed one, your soul. Because you're holy, because you're holy, because you're holy, I will not fear. Because you're with me. Because you're with me. Because you're with me. Because